Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, November 11th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with those two huge games that went on the SEC this past weekend. We had Ole Miss get a huge win over Georgia, as well as Alabama go into Baton Rouge and get a huge win over LSU and probably knock out LSU from the CFP race. Then we'll get into a little talk around the upsets and close calls all around the country. Obviously, the big one is Miami going down to Georgia Tech, and then we had Indiana barely escape against Michigan and Ann Arbor. Then we'll get into the Big 12. We'll jump into Colorado and BYU, two huge performances there. One, Colorado dominating Texas Tech for much of that game. Started a little bit slow, but got into a groove late. And then you had BYU just barely escape a Utah team that playing a little bit better football right about now. Then we'll get into the top 25. We'll get a little bit of a roundup of at least the top performances from that weekend, including feels like Texas is kind of finding their way back to that early season form we saw in Ann Arbor. Then we'll get into that Week 11 wrap up, and we'll get into Ohio State and Oregon just getting one step closer to that possible rematch in Indianapolis. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click the $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that if you will. And also GSMCpodcast.net, still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those you'd like to use, please do. We can have fun back and forth here. But let's jump into these first couple of games because we have a lot to get to. Let's go ahead and jump into these. We have Ole Miss just dominating Georgia in a lot of different ways, and we'll start there because this was pretty remarkable. This was probably the moment that Ole Miss fans have been waiting for quite some time, really. It felt like a moment where that program, where a lot of the different things that they've been trying to put into place for the last couple of years finally kind of came together, finally kind of all fell into the right position, and now you're in a place where the CFP is very much in reach. Obviously, got to win out the rest of the way, but there's very little to no chance that a 10-2 Ole Miss is going to be left out of that thing. So a huge win for them, and really, it was the D-line. It was absolutely incredible what they were able to do to this Georgia offensive line that has been a little bit up and down this year, not necessarily to the Georgia standard of things, but is still one of the better units in the entire country. So you got a D-line that obviously can compete with those elite groups on Ole Miss, and frankly, they really just went to work on them. It wasn't just competing. It was absolutely dominating them pretty much from start to finish. And then the big thing here was Ole Miss's ability to bounce back was really incredible. You know, they throw a pick on the third play of the game. Georgia comes down and scores really immediately, and Jackson Dart goes down, and you just have to figure it out. Austin Simmons did a great job on a 10-play touchdown drive, and then they kind of just took over. The drive chart for UGA in the second half was field goal to start. Then they had a fumble on the Ole Miss 29-yard line. They had an interception on the Ole Miss 27-yard line, another fumble, and a turnover on down. So essentially 4 turnovers in the second half for Georgia. So absolute domination from this Ole Miss defense. And yeah, this Georgia offense still has the same issues that a lot of us felt like they had, and it really came to the surface in this one. So a lot of stuff that they're going to have to figure out, no doubt about that. But how Ole Miss was able to win, I think obviously that D-line was absolutely dominant. Georgia had 59 yards on 33 carries, and it was just they were all over them pretty much from start to finish. Nate Frazier got going a little bit early, but that was about it for the entire day. They had 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and when you look back at this offseason, that was where a lot of the energy was put. You had Walter Nolan come in. You had Princely Umanmielen come in. You had a lot of these really talented guys on that defensive front, and really just that front seven. You had Chris Paul Jr. You had so many different guys that came into this team and has totally changed the physical nature of this team. They are an aggressor now. They are no longer the team that has to find different ways to beat you, has to score 55 points, has to do really special stuff on the offensive side of the ball. They scored 28 points today. It was not necessarily the prettiest day offensively for a lot of different reasons, and the reality is you have a defense now that can drag you to wins, can carry you to wins, and they give up 10 points to an offense that, even with all the mistakes, had been putting up 34 points a game. So it's an incredible performance. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you got enough from the run game. It was never going to be this dominant run game that totally won the game for you, but 134 yards, 36 carries, 3.7 yards per carry, it's not great. It's not necessarily perfect, but without Henry Parrish, without a lot of these elite running backs, That's pretty good. And it puts you in a really good position where you can possibly run the ball just a little bit more aggressively going forward. You can take a little bit of pressure off Jackson Dart, especially as he gets back from that injury. So there's a lot of things at play here for Ole Miss, and it feels like this entire game was just a kind of arrival for that fan base that had been waiting so long to really turn that next page, to really get over that hump. Felt like this was the moment where they really did that. And then no panic early. We talked about it. They picked off Jackson Dart to start the game on the third play, immediately drove down and scored. From that moment forward, they outscored Georgia 28-3, forced 3 turnovers and a turnover on downs. They were all over this team pretty much from start to finish, barring that little bit of a blip to start this game. So really remarkable performance from Ole Miss and puts them in a great position going forward. So where they go from here is just go ahead and win out. That's all you really have to do. And obviously, much more to it than that. But you do have a bye this upcoming week to let Jackson Dart get healthy, let Trey Harris get healthy, which is absolutely huge. And then you got at Florida, you got Mississippi State. You get through that Florida game, you're probably going to the CFP. Obviously, got to keep your on your P's and Q's in that Mississippi State game. But at the end of the day, you could be in that kind of crazy group that could be at 10-2, which we will likely get into tomorrow. And it's one of those things where you're not getting left out. With a win like this, you are not getting left out if you have all of the other things that you need if you win the next 2 games, obviously. So some things to handle, but they could be in Atlanta at the end of the day. Even if they don't get to Atlanta, they went out there in the CFP. For Georgia, you're officially on thin ice. Now, you went out. You're in the CFP, no doubt about that, and you could be in Atlanta as well. But at the end of the day, you do have Tennessee coming to town. Very good defense, maybe even a better defensive line than Ole Miss has. So it's going to be a fight. And then after Tennessee, you get that win. You have a UMass and Georgia Tech to win it, or to finish it in Athens. So win those 2, you're at 10-2. You're in the mess of the SEC, but you're definitely in. With that schedule that they've played, a 10-2 Georgia is not getting left out of this thing. So feels like 2 teams that could be possibly re-meeting in the CFP, but as of right now, they are 2 teams that are just fighting the rest of the way. If they win out, I expect to see both those teams in the 12-team field, but Georgia's got some issues that if they don't figure out, they're going to go down next weekend and be totally out of this thing. Then you got Alabama, a huge win for Alabama, 42-13 over LSU at LSU, and they did the thing that I think a lot of Bama fans have been wanting to do for quite some time, which is just play murder ball. That's who they are. At their core, that is who Alabama is, and they had 48 carries, 311 yards, and 6 touchdowns on the ground. So they did exactly that. That is what Bama fans want to do. That is what they're going to be good at if they're going to win a national title, and man, were they good at it on Saturday. They were all over the place, and LSU has likely bowed out of the CFP race. Technically, they're still in the SEC title race, but they're not going to get there. I'm just going to be totally honest. There's too many teams, there's too much craziness and too many tiebreakers for them to find their way there. But they joined South Carolina and those 3 lost teams in the conference, and I think we're finding out more and more that's pretty much the cut line in the SEC right now. So you drop below those 2 losses, you're probably in a good bit of trouble. And then really impressive stuff from this Bama back end. You know, it was a worry coming into this game that Nussmeier was going to be able to essentially just dice them up pretty much every which way from Tuesday. It was going to be able to push the ball downfield. Well, he averaged 5.7 yards per pass and only had 1 touchdown and a pair of picks. So this back end did their job. There's no doubt about that. And the defense overall is really finding themselves. They did get the bad news that Quay Robinson is going to be out for the rest of the year. A huge pass rusher on that team and something they're going to have to deal with. But overall, they've been absolutely incredible. They lost Keon Saab a couple of weeks ago. Bray Hubbard's been absolutely incredible. So they should be okay, but definitely something to watch down the stretch of the season. And this Bama team is scary. If they're running the ball that way, if Milroe's getting going the way that he was in this game, they can get to the SEC title, they can win that thing, they can get a bye, and they can be your national title winner. So a lot of things are going right for Bama right now, and it feels like the team that a lot of Bama fans missed early on in the season, well, feels like they've kind of rounded into form just a little bit more throughout this one. And really impressive performance here that probably was their best of the year, at least from start to finish. How they were able to win, I think the biggest one is Milroe Magic. He is one of the best players, if not the best player, when he is running downhill. He is absolutely terrifying. 12 carries, 185 yards, 4 scores for the second time in a row against LSU on the ground. He was incredible. He only threw 18 passes, but was 12 for 18, 109 yards passing. It wasn't great passing the ball, and it doesn't need to be if you're running the ball that incredibly. And this is one of those guys that if he's being used this way, if he's allowed to get on the edge and allowed to make plays with his legs, that might be the very best player in America. He is absolutely a problem, and frankly, if he's rolling downhill the way that he was in this one the rest of the season, it might just be the team to beat in the SEC the rest of the way. And then the linebacker play is just remarkable. You knew that this duo coming into the season was going to be one of the best in the country, and they played good football pretty much throughout the year. There's been little blips where it hasn't been quite as clean, but Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson just won this game outright, at least for the defensive side of the ball, was just all over the place. Jahad Campbell, becoming one of my favorite players in college football, had 12 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Deontay Lawson had 7 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and an INT. They were all over the place, and they are the heart and soul of this defense, and as they have started to play better, this entire defense has started to play better, and if this is the level that you're getting the rest of the way, then this is going to be one of the better defenses in the SEC. And then you made LSU one-dimensional. This was something that LSU was always going to struggle with one way or another, but you really made them one-dimensional. They were not able to run the ball much at all in this game, and then when you're down by 25, 20 points, you're going to have to throw the ball. So you push them into a really, really tough position. It makes it so much easier for your back end that might be a little bit underhanded in certain points to sit a little bit further back, not necessarily give up that big-time play, and that's exactly what they did. LSU didn't score 13 early on in this game. They scored it very late in it, and it was one of the more impressive defensive performances, really, of any team this entire year. It was absolutely remarkable, and really getting them to be one-dimensional, getting them to be only a pass-heavy team because they were down by so much, put you in a great position just defensively to keep everything in front of you and make sure that you win that game. So remarkable performance from this Alabama defense, and feels like everything's just kind of fallen into place for this Alabama team. But where they go from here, I mean, you're sitting really pretty. You got Mercer, you got at Oklahoma, and then Auburn to finish. 10-2 gets you into the CFP. You have wins over UGA and LSU. Possibly, depending on the tiebreaker, you could get to Atlanta. It's one of those things in the SEC that we might just have to wait one more week to fully figure out how all of this is going to flesh out, but we'll try to get into it tomorrow, try to give you guys at least a good idea of where everything sits. But another game that puts them in a really good position, and a 10-2 Alabama, just like Ole Miss and Georgia, they are getting into the field, no doubt about that, regardless of if they go to Atlanta or not. And I think if they win out, they're probably in Atlanta. Depending on the different tiebreakers, I think it works out in their favor. But regardless, we will get into that. But for LSU, a huge miss from Brian Kelly. Feels like they're heading towards another 9-3 season. Hypothetically, they still have a path to Atlanta and to the SEC title, and that would be their only path into the playoff. But they have at Florida, Vanderbilt, and OU to finish. They should be able to win all those games. Obviously, going to Florida this weekend's a little bit sketchy. Vanderbilt, always a tough matchup, but overall, they should be able to win those games. But a 9-3 season is not what LSU fans came here for. That's just the reality. They did not come to 2024 to go 9-3 again, to miss out again, and have the issues be relatively similar. Obviously, this defense has gotten a lot better. Obviously, this offense has taken a little bit of a step back. But overall, they're still looking at a very talented team, one that probably should be capable of more than this, that continues to miss the mark. So a really tough loss for LSU. Not quite as... LSU had a tougher loss than Georgia did, which makes them feel a little bit better, but it's one of those positions where it feels like Georgia is still in a place where they can make the CFP if they win out. It feels like a place where Ole Miss, if they win out, they're in. Alabama, if they win out, they're in. You're figuring out that the SEC is going to be an absolute nightmare, and the idea of 5 SEC teams making it into the CFP is not all that crazy. But we'll get into that a little bit later, and we'll take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to get into the upsets from all around the country. We had Miami go down, Iowa State, Pitt go down, and then we had Indiana absolutely escape. We'll break it all down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into the huge SEC games that went on, and we had Ole Miss and we had Alabama get huge wins and set themselves up very, very nicely for a CFP run towards the last couple of weeks of the season. Georgia's still very much in it. LSU likely out of the race as of this moment. But let's get into the upset alerts. All around the country, we had a number of different upsets that really shook up the CFP race, and probably none more than the one that happened down there in Atlanta, Georgia, and what a performance from this Georgia Tech defense to start this off. I mean, you have a Miami offense that is so hard to stop pretty much every which way from Tuesday, and they had moments in the second half where it felt like maybe they were starting to put things together, maybe they were going to be a problem down the way, and maybe they were going to do the thing that they've done so many different times, but they finally got burned. They've been playing with fire for the last about 5 weeks against Virginia Tech, against Cal, against Duke last week. A number of different teams that had the ability to possibly get this done had come up a little bit short, and Georgia Tech was able to get it done, really because this defense was up to the challenge pretty much all day. And really, it came in the most bizarre quarterback situation I've seen in quite some time at Georgia Tech, because Haynes King got 48 snaps in this one. Aaron Philo got 17. They both had a touchdown passing. Haynes King added 93 yards and a score on the ground. It was a very, very interesting game plan from Buster Faulkner offensively, and it worked at different moments, didn't work at other moments, but it definitely worked when they were running the football. 48 carries, 271 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, and they were all over the place. And the misdirection of this Georgia Tech offense did Miami in. They were very, very confused, and it led to a ton of open run lanes, a ton of jet sweeps that got open, a lot of really incredible things, and it shows you just how good Buster Faulkner is at putting together an offense and setting up his team for success. And then on the other side of the ball, Cam Ward did just about everything that he possibly could do in this game. Had 300 yards, had 3 touchdowns, did make a couple of mistakes, including the fumble you're seeing right there, but at the end of the day, he did just about everything he could. 24 carries for 88 yards is just not going to be able to get it done. That's the reality of this Miami team, is if they're going to be one-dimensional, which they absolutely have the capability of being, you're going to be in a really bad spot. That's just the reality of who Miami is. So you're going to have to find a way to get that run game going, at least give people the semblance that you're going to be able to run on them, because Georgia Tech was not fearful of that at all. They were able to sit back and cover just a little bit more, and they made a number of different plays in this game, especially even just a ton of coverage sacks. It felt like Cam Ward was trying to find someone open, and he just couldn't, and Georgia Tech was able to get home. It wasn't like their defensive line was totally outmanning the Miami offensive line. They just had plenty of time to find their way to the quarterback. So Miami takes a tough loss here. Obviously, a lot of things that they need to figure out, and maybe they just needed a loss to really whip everything back into shape. But for Georgia Tech, this is a massive win for this program. It puts them in bowl eligibility, shows Brent Key is building something at Georgia Tech, which if you've seen him play in these types of games, you kind of already know that. But at the end of the day, you got NC State, then Georgia to finish. Let's say you beat NC State, you lose to Georgia, which is relatively likely at this very moment. 7-5 in a bowl game is a huge win for 2024 for Georgia Tech, and they can continue building forward. They have a really solid recruiting class coming in, and this is probably the win that fully keeps that intact. And then for Miami, puts you in a weird spot, no doubt about that. I do believe if you win out, especially if, let's just say this, if you win out and Clemson loses to Pitt next weekend, you go in with no danger. You have no tiebreakers. You have no craziness to deal with. If Clemson were to beat Pitt, then you have a little bit of a tiebreaker craziness. I do believe that Miami would win out in that scenario, but I'll look into it tonight, get back with a little bit of a report tomorrow. But the CFP hopes are in danger, no doubt about that. You got to beat Wake Forest. You got to beat Syracuse. You lose one of those games, you're in a lot of trouble. Maybe you still make it to the ACC title and find a way to win it, but at the end of the day, you would officially be on the hot seat, and it could just be Pitt that ends up jumping you and getting to the championship. So a lot of different things happening over there at Miami and putting them in a really bad position, but you win out. I think you still make the ACC title. You win it, you're still in. So everything's still on the table, but this was a hit that was probably coming at some point, and Georgia Tech was able to give it to them this past weekend. And then we got Iowa State. Their entire season has fallen apart in 8 days. And I hate to see it. I got to be totally honest. I'm a big Cyclones guy. Love Matt Campbell. Love the energy around that program. But when you allow over 500 yards, 200 on the ground and through the air, you're not going to win a lot of games. You'll find that. But Jalen Daniels had 363 total yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. Alongside him, Devin Neal topped 100 yards rushing, 2 scores. Quentin Skinner had 100 yards receiving and a score. It was remarkable what this offense did for Kansas, and it felt like they could just do no wrong in this game. So Iowa State's obviously got a lot of stuff to figure out, and they did plenty wrong in this game. But the only flaw for the Iowa State offense really was the run game in this one, and it was somewhat circumstantial with how this game unfolded. But 24 carries, 78 yards, and 1 touchdown, and a long carry of 15 yards. So it's obviously a little bit worse than that on a down-to-down basis, but they broke one and were able to make that number look a little bit better. So really, really tough. And it puts Iowa State in a very, very bad place going forward, especially with the Colorado win this past weekend, which we'll get into here in the next segment. You're now in a position where you need to win out and you need Colorado to drop one. I still think you would have the tiebreaker if you were to get to that place where you both had 2 losses and you were fighting it out. But as of right now, you're in a really, really tough spot. And for Kansas, this is a huge win. A very fun win. Gives them a little bit of an ability to feel good about themselves heading into the offseason. But you have the ability to continue spoiling. You're at BYU this weekend, then Colorado comes to town. Maybe you just get 3 straight wins and totally mess up the entirety of the top of the Big 12. But then for Iowa State, you don't control your own destiny anymore. Like I said, you got to beat KSU, hope for an extra loss from Colorado, and then win that game in Arlington. But a quick crash down to earth for Iowa State, and now you got a lot of questions as you head forward into the rest of this season. Then we had Pitt go down to Virginia, and yet again, another team that their entire season has fallen apart in the matter of 8 days. It was absolutely insane to watch, but here we are. It was one of those teams that it felt like everything was going incredibly well. It felt like everything was falling into place, but just wasn't quite enough against Virginia on Saturday, and there were a couple of calls that I don't necessarily love, but that's a conversation for another time. But the Pitt offense averaged 4.7 yards per attempt, 4 yards per carry in this one. The yards per carry was helped by a 34-yard carry by Desmond Reed really late in this game, so it was not a pretty day. And when they had a chance to win it, they had an INT from Nate Yarnell, who actually came in for Eli Holstein in this game. So a lot of things going wrong for that Pitt offense. It feels like they are kind of floundering right now, and they're floundering at the very worst time, because if they were able to bounce back, get this win, and then head into that Clemson game, you would have every ability to win that game and possibly be right back in the ACC title discussion. But right now, you're in a really bad spot going forward. And then for Virginia, the most impressive thing to me was they got 15 carries from Xavier Brown. They got 12 from Kobe Pace. They got 14 from Anthony Colandrea. They had 7 players catch a pass. It was not explosive. It was not special. It was not a ton of big-time plays. But they got the ball down the field, and it was really incredible to watch. It was a game plan that was really just about gutting it out, and that's exactly what they did. So a huge win for Virginia. It gives them a real shot at bowl eligibility. You got at Notre Dame, SMU, and at Virginia Tech to win it. So you got to win one of those. They are going to be a dangerous team in all 3 of those. Frankly, I'd be surprised if that Notre Dame-Virginia game did not come up on upset alerts later in the week. But obviously, we will get to that. But overall, you win one more game, you go bowling, and Tony Elliott's team feels like it's kind of heading in the right direction. For Pitt, this is a huge one to lose. No doubt about that. If they had the ability to win, they're walking into Clemson with a real shot at the ACC title still. Now it feels like that is a distant memory. After Clemson, they have at Louisville, they have Boston College. Even if they win that Clemson game, I still think they're in a really tough position and still could be on the outside looking in at the end of the day. It was a very, very fun run from Pitt, and I think they're a very talented team and a program that's heading in the right direction, especially with Eli Holstein at quarterback. But as of right now, you're just missing the mark a little bit. As of right now, you're just not quite at the place you need to be, and I do think there will be openings in 2025, but definitely a tough finish to a really promising season at least a couple of weeks ago. And then we had this one. This is the one that Indiana needed. I know a lot of people are worried about Indiana. I'm right there with you, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll talk about that a little bit more deeply as we go through this. But the reality is, you need one of these games. There's never been a team that has been able to win a national title just beating everyone by 21 points. That has never happened. LSU kind of did that in 2019, but just in general, they did have the fight against Alabama. But overall, there are a lot of different ways that teams have to win games. There are a lot of different ways that they're just going to have to adapt to situations and not be playing their best football and then find a way to win. There's so many different things that have to happen for a team to win a national title. One of them is beating a team that you should beat by 5 points. Some of them are, winning on a last-second field goal. Some of them, like Texas last year against Kansas State, stopping them in overtime on a 4th and goal just to get a win. That stuff has to happen. It shows you where you are. It shows you who you are. And sometimes it whips that team into shape so they can finish strong. It's really, really one of those things that you see this game and it's easy to be like, okay, so Indiana is who we thought they were. Indiana is the team that hasn't played and won. They finally play a physical team with a pulse and they're not able to keep up. And maybe that is part of this. I do think that holds a place in this. But the reality is being able to mentally bounce back from that and handle that business is really, really impressive. And Curtis Rourke had his probably toughest day of the year, to be totally honest with you, but was able to pick up the slack for a run game that had 40 yards on 28 carries. He went 17 for 28, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an INT. He was not perfect by any means, but he did just about everything for this offense in a lot of different ways, and it was not a pretty day from this offense, but you got a quarterback that can definitely get the job done. And then for Michigan, you did a really good job getting yourself back in this game. 3 straight scoring drives, although one was off a pick and only 4 yards. You had 3 straight scoring drives, got it to a 2-point game, and then went backward on the next drive, narrowly missed a 4th and 10 on the other. So you had your chances, no doubt about that, and it feels like kind of a microcosm of the Michigan season more than anything else. Hopefully you can flip Bryce Underwood and everything changes around there, but as of right now, it's a really, really tough product to watch for Michigan's offense, but Indiana got the win. That's what's important. I have big worries about this offensive line against a physical defensive line because you got a really physical one, maybe even a better one than you just faced coming up in a couple of weeks, but you dodged the bullet, and that's what everyone that has ever won a Big Ten title, everyone that's ever gone to the CFP has had to do. They were able to do it in this one, and now you move forward with your undefeated season intact. Now you have a huge bye week that is so helpful. Then it's Ohio State, and it's one of those things where I'm still wondering if they get rolled by Ohio State, if they lose by 14 points, are they on the outside looking in? I'm starting to believe that's probably more and more the case. But we'll find out on Tuesday where they sit and all the craziness, and we'll find out, are they going to be a team kind of on the chopping block? But for Michigan, the nightmare season gets worse, and that's just going to be the way it is pretty much the rest of the way. You should be able to get a win over Northwestern to get bowl eligible, but then Ohio State comes to town. And frankly, if you can win that game, all this season is fixed. I'll be totally honest. Every Michigan fan would be more than fine. They'd be moving into 2025 with all the hope in the world. You lose it, and then you got some questions. And definitely one of those games where you fully expect Michigan to lose that game. So a very frustrating season for Michigan, no doubt about that. And then you had Miami go down. Finally, they they've been playing with fire for quite some time. They got burned, and it happens to just about everyone, especially in a year like this. But you'll be able to bounce back, get to the ACC title, and win it, you'll be more than fine. But obviously a situation that Miami did not want to be in, and now we're going to have to figure out how they find their way out of it. But still a lot of really, really great things that they can do this season, along with Indiana, still very much in the mix and really just able to get out with a win in the grossest possible circumstances. Kind of shows you just how tough that team is. But we'll get into all the craziness over the next couple of days. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to get into the Big 12. They had 2 huge performances this past weekend from Colorado and BYU in 2 very different styles. And we'll break it down and how it affects the Big 12 race right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the big time upsets as well as Indiana barely avoiding one of those big time upsets this past weekend. Miami, obviously the big one, and puts them in a really weird spot. If they win out, I think they're in the ACC title. I think they still have a great shot to go to the CFP, but no more mistakes is where they're at right now. They cannot make one more misstep. If they do, then they're on the outside looking in, and this great start that they had comes to a crashing halt. But we got to get to the Big 12 because we had two of the leaders become very, very decisive leaders this past weekend, and we'll start with that team over there in Boulder, Colorado, because I don't know what more needs to be said about this Colorado team at this point. You know, I was very firmly on the side that this is going to be an improved team. This is going to be a better team. They're going to be able to play better, more complete football. They are not getting above 7 wins. That was firmly my stance. Was if they get above 7 wins, if they get to 8-4, if they get to 9-3, if they somehow compete for a Big 12 title, they will be he will be my favorite for college or for coach of the year. They will be one of the best stories in college football, and they would absolutely deserve all the love in the world. Well, then now they're the favorites to win the Big 12. They're the favorites to possibly go to the CFP at this point, and all of the stuff that people called Dion, including myself, called Dion crazy for, they are on the verge of doing, and it's just remarkable to watch. And it was the guys. Again, it was Shadur Sanders putting on a show like he does just about every single week without a run game, just like he does just about every single week. 30 for 43, 291, 4 scores. This offensive line deserves a ton of credit for what they've been able to do. Cash Cleveland, a walk-on freshman, being able to hold down the center position is remarkable. Jordan Seaton is becoming the guy that we all expected him to be coming out of high school. He's becoming that Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell level tackle that is going to develop in one of the best in the entire country over the next couple of years. So it's been awesome to watch. It's so much fun to watch. Travis Hunter played 155 snaps in this game, and I'm not even joking. I've gotten very numb to him being a freak, him doing all of those crazy things. 155 hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't physically know how that's possible. He also had 99 yards receiving, just for fun. He had 99 yards receiving. He had a touchdown. He was all over the place. So I don't know how to explain it at this point. He is a medical marvel. That's the best way that I can put it. But for Texas Tech, they had an offense that just made way too many mistakes. They opened this game up 13-0. They're playing really, really good football. And then in the second half, you had 5 drives in the second half after being down only 24-20. It goes turnover on downs, INT, fumble, turnover on downs. Remarkable stuff from this defense for Colorado, and almost remarkable stuff from this Texas Tech offense being that inept. But at the end of the day, really, really good stuff from a Buffs defense that just continues to get better, continues to get more stout, especially on the interior of that defensive line. It's been really remarkable to watch. So could not be more impressed with what Colorado has done this year, and this is a very complete performance. Every single week, it feels like it gets a little bit more complete, it gets a little bit more different, and even in a game where they couldn't run the ball, where they were highly penalized, where they had a couple of mistakes early in this game, able to win it is really incredible. Able to win it by 2 touchdowns is even more incredible. So remarkable stuff, and how they were able to get it done. The ability to bounce back is something that has shown time and again really this year for Colorado, but really in this game, you're down 13-0 early on. Texas Tech missed a couple opportunities to make it even worse than that, but you're down 13-0 early on in the first quarter. And you got to find a way out. You got to find a way to get it done. Colorado didn't score until halfway through the second quarter. They outscored them 41-14 the rest of the way. The defense played incredibly well. The offense was the Colorado offense in a lot of ways, and it was really remarkable to watch. And on that offensive side of the ball, you spread the rock around. There's no doubt about that. You had all 3 wide receivers, all 3 remarkably talented guys got involved. Travis Hunter, 9 catches, 99 yards, and a touchdown. LeJounte Wester, 6 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown. Will Shepard, 8 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown. I realize that it says carries right now. It should be catches, but at the end of the day, a touchdown for all 3. It was just too much for Texas Tech to handle with a pass defense that is not very good. Let's just be totally honest. But Colorado was very much able to exploit that. And then disruption up front. It wasn't just the edge rushers that I love so much, and Dayon Hayes and BJ Green made a number of plays, but 7 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. The run game for Texas Tech, they did get over 100 yards for Taj Brooks. It was pretty tough sledding to get there. It wasn't necessarily the prettiest day, even though the box score might look a little bit nicer. it was not necessarily the greatest day running the ball. So really remarkable stuff from this Colorado defense, and it's one of those things that just continues to show the growth of this team, not only offensively, not only from a talent perspective, but just from a outright toughness perspective. This is a totally different team than it was a year ago. But where they go from here, I think you control your own destiny, especially with Iowa State's loss. You are now the favorite to win that conference. You win out, you go to Arlington, you win that game. Now, you do have Utah, a team that's very, very good defensively, could kind of stifle that run game and really create problems for that offense, and maybe things go off the rails. You have at Kansas in 2 weeks, very, very hot team that's playing really good football. And then you got Oklahoma State to finish, so that should be a win. But at the end of the day, they have so much. This team is so much fun. The story is absolutely incredible. They deserve a ton of respect, probably more than they're getting right now. But overall, there's a team in the driver's seat for the first time in a very, very long time in this conference. For the first time in any conference for a very, very long time, Colorado is in the driving seat and possibly could be the team that ends up going to the CFP from the Big 12. Not words that I thought I'd be saying around this time of year, but here we are. Remarkable stuff from Dion, and the train just keeps rolling on. For Texas Tech, this knocks them out of the CFP, knocks them out of the Big 12 race, and I don't want to say ends their season because I've never been someone that says it has to be playoff or bust, but you can get two really nice wins over Oklahoma State and West Virginia to finish out 8-4 and continue rolling on. I still think this is a program heading in the right direction, but obviously the outside hope of getting a Big 12 title comes to an end this year. And then you got BYU being able to escape against Utah, because this one, like Indiana, this was a very, very tough game. They were able to escape with a undefeated record, and a little bit of controversy on that 4th and 10 on the last drive. After seeing all the angles, I do think it was holding on Utah. Obviously a tough way for that to happen, but I do think it was holding. I do think the right call was made there. But this is the first game this year where Jake Retzlaff just did not look like himself. He was 15 for 33, 219, no scores, had negative yards rushing, which is kind of his big-time thing. The thing that makes that offense so dangerous was his rushing ability. The Utah D-line was not having any of it. And then on the other side, Brandon Rose for Utah did some good work, considering all of the craziness around that quarterback position. Coming in, going 12 for 21, 2 touchdowns and 1 INT, and then another INT on a trick play and a fumble from another player. It put him in a really tough spot. But the quarterback was not necessarily the huge reason for that spot, which I think a lot of people expected to be the case in this one. But a huge one for BYU. Iowa State lost, and you have Colorado at 1 loss, everyone else at 2. You can lose a game. From the rest of the way, you can lose one game and still be firmly in that Big 12 title and firmly in the CFP race. Obviously, you want to be able to run the table the rest of the way, but it's this is a win that if you lost, you're officially on thin ice with a couple of really tough games coming up. You're able to win, and now you got a couple of tough games coming up, but you're not necessarily as scared of those games as you probably could have been if that kick goes a little bit to the left. If that kick gets blown just a little bit off and you miss it, then you're having a different conversation. But you get the win, and how they were able to do it. The defensive adjustments were remarkable. This was not a very, very pretty game. I realize that's Mason Graham right there. Apologies. I obviously put in the wrong picture, but BYU was trailing 21-10 early on in this one. Utah finished the first half with 3 touchdown drives, and then right after it, they allowed 0 drives, 1 drive of over 20 yards in the second half with an INT. It was just remarkable what they were able to do on the defensive side of the ball against a team that was really kind of rolling in the first half, even with Brandon Rose at quarterback. And then you won the turnover and special teams battle. That is what BYU has done the entirety of the year, and it's been a big reason why they're at the position they are. But 3 turnovers, you got 6 points off turnovers, which doesn't sound all that great, but when you win by 1 point, that's more than enough. And then you had a number of games where, just like this one, Keelan Marion takes one back to the house and gives your offense the only points you had in the entirety of the first half. So really remarkable stuff from everyone else other than the offense in a lot of different respects in this game for BYU, but you got to win games in different ways, and they're really doing that. And then finally, the offense finishing. It was not the prettiest day from the offense by any means, but getting a 9-play, 95-yard touchdown drive and then an 11-play, 65-yard field goal drive to win it is really remarkable. In a fourth quarter where it felt like they were just going to get suffocated, not have a shot to win it, they were able to get the ball back just those couple extra times, get that win. Was really, really impressive to watch. So for BYU, the world is yours. You're in a really, really good spot. You avoided that huge upset spot, and coming up, you do have Kansas, you do have at Arizona State. So 2 very tough games. You go 1-1, you're in a really good spot to go to Arlington and be in the CFP and possibly, get that bye. So really remarkable stuff from BYU. This felt like the game where everything could come crashing to a halt and everything could kind of really be in a really tough spot for BYU going forward. They handled business and they kept moving on their way. Obviously, it was not all that pretty the entire time, but getting that win, moving on undefeated is absolutely huge and puts them in not only a place where you feel good about your chances to get to the Big 12 championship, but I'd be downright surprised if they weren't there at this point. I'll be totally honest. But for Utah, this one hurts. No doubt about that. Felt like a moment where this season that has gone not at all the way that you wanted it to could kind of get back on track, kind of salvage it just a little bit. But now you need 2 out of 3 wins between Colorado, ISU, and UCF to go to a bowl game. Going to be really tough, no doubt about that. This defense can give you a shot to win just about every game, and that Colorado game probably will be on the upset alert meter as well. I won't lie to you, but at the end of the day, it's going to be really tough for them to finish this at 6 wins, and it's a very, very weird feeling for a lot of Utah fans, and probably a very tough finish to the Kyle Whittingham era over there. So a lot of things going on around the country, but the Big 12 feels like it's kind of starting to figure itself out. If these 2 teams win out the rest of the way, they will meet in Arlington, and winner gets in. I think that's probably the way that we're heading right now. Maybe if BYU is undefeated and Colorado beats them, maybe we're having a conversation, but I feel pretty good saying the winner of the Big 12 is in. The loser, regardless of what you did in the regular season, is probably out. But obviously still plenty to figure out here, and I think yeah, I mean, Anthony, there is an argument to be made there. There's no doubt about that. There is an argument to be made that there are a lot of overrated teams all around the country right about now. You can make the argument about Texas. You can make the argument about Penn State in a lot of ways. You can make the argument about Indiana. It's a weird season. And I think Miami, although I would probably describe them as overrated, I would probably describe them as a relatively flawed team that just hadn't gotten burned yet. Maybe getting burned was the best thing for them. Maybe getting that moment where everything kind of falls into place, they finally get consequences to their actions, and they can move forward from here. We'll find out a lot about them over the next couple of weeks, and everything's still on the table. That's the good news for them. So at least you waited until the ACC cleared out just a little bit more to take that loss, and now you just got to see what you can do to bounce back. Obviously not the loss you wanted to take, but at the end of the day, still a very talented team, and I fully expect them to be in the ACC championship and be playing for a spot in the CFP. But obviously, it did help out a lot of the Miami haters. I'll give you that, Anthony. No doubt about that. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we got a couple of top 25 performances that I want to get into, including feels like Texas is finding their groove again. I know it was Florida, but it feels like this team is finding all the things that were missing early on. Feels like they might just be finding their groove, and if that's the case, then this might be a team that finds themselves in November and goes on a title run. But we'll get into that along with everything else right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about those big 2 performances in the Big 12 that gave us a little bit of clarity. If BYU went out, those are the teams that you're going to have in the Big 12 title game, and that's about it. Makes it a little bit easier in a conference that felt like it was going to have tiebreakers all over the place. Maybe we're avoiding that. We still have some ways to go, and maybe I just jinxed it. But at the end of the day, we're in a good position right now, and Colorado and BYU feel great about where they are right now in the Big 12. But let's get into a little bit of a top 25 roundup. Won't get to all the top 25 teams here. We will get to them in the next segment, but wanted to get to a couple of the ones that really stuck out to me, and we'll start with that number 5 team in the country, the Texas Longhorns. They get a dominating win, 49-17 over Florida, and it could have been uglier than this. As crazy as that sounds, it could have been uglier than this, and this must have been just a bad dream for Florida fans across the country, because the news that came out earlier this week that Billy Napier is They didn't say he would be back in 2025, so it's something I'm watching, but I have every indication to believe he will be back in 2025, so I'm not necessarily going to read into it that aggressively. That's got to hurt. Knowing that he's going to be your guy for the next, 12 months, for the next 14 months, and then the immediate aftermath is you getting torched by Texas is not what you want to do by any mean. But I think the good news is for Texas here is, first of all, you got Arch Manning plenty of time on the field. He played 25 minutes of game time in this one. So you dominated them from start to finish. And then I think the other thing here that had been missing from Texas for the last really since that Michigan game, but in a lot of ways since Quinn Ewers came back from that injury, was the downfield passing game. It was not nearly there the way that it was early on, especially against Michigan. It has not been where you need it to be if you're going to make a title run. It really was in this one. They were absolutely remarkable. They passed the ball downfield. Like Quinn Ewers was 7 for 11, 112 yards, 3 touchdowns on passes beyond 10 yards. Had a drop in there that probably could have been another big-time play down the field to DeAndre Moore. So he did incredibly well, pushing the ball downfield. He looks really healthy from that oblique strain that obviously had been holding him back in that Oklahoma, in that Georgia game, and even in that Vanderbilt game. Felt like he just didn't quite have the spin on the ball, didn't quite have the oomph on the ball that he usually has. He did in this one. Overall, he went 19 for 27, 333, and 5 touchdowns, all in the first about 35 minutes of this game. He stayed in for one possession of the second half, but after a fumble and then a quick touchdown, he was out of there and they moved on with their day. But really remarkable stuff. It was a performance that they very badly needed and puts them in a position where everything's still in front of you. Obviously, I'll be totally honest, they feel like the team that if they were 10-2 in the sea of teams in the SEC that are 10-2, they would be the one that would be left out, probably for good reason. They haven't played that big-time opponent. When they did, Georgia really gave it to them. So I wouldn't necessarily argue with that by any respect, but it could be that they need to win out the rest of the way. It could be that they need to be in Atlanta for that SEC title to find their way into the playoffs. So they got a couple of huge ones coming up. They head to Arkansas, which last time they went up there, it was not very kind to Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns. And then you have Kentucky and A&M to finish. So some tough games, not necessarily games that you wouldn't like Texas in, but definitely some games that could trip you up. And I think if you have one loss, I think Texas is probably the team that's on the chopping block the most, at least in the SEC. And then we got Penn State. This was a huge win for Penn State in so many different ways, and I think the biggest one was you just needed to get the monkey off your back. You needed to remind yourself that you are Penn State, that you have the capability to play games like this where you get out to an early lead, you run the ball to a finish, you play great defense, and that's about that. And frankly, you played such good defense that Washington finally made the quarterback change. Will Rogers was benched for Damon Williams Jr., and he did some good things when he was in that game. I expect him to be the guy the rest of the way, and it was something I talked about even before the season, just saying at some point, Washington was going to have to think about 2025, and Damon Williams Jr. is 2025. So I expect him to start the rest of the way, and Penn State was just the team that made it happen, really more than anything else. But to me, this was a perfect offensive game from Penn State. Obviously not gaudy numbers by any means, but Drew Aller, 20 for 28, 220 through the air, and a score. He had overall, they had 40 carries, 266 on the ground, 2 scores, including 4 straight touchdowns to start this game in the first half. They were remarkable. They were all over the place. They did the thing that makes them so special, which is run the ball and then pick your moments in the pass game. And although, maybe that's not the way that Penn State fans want this to work, they want to be able to push the ball downfield. They want to use Drew Aller's arm strength, and he's got it to use, no doubt about that. Sometimes you just got to play to your strengths, and I think they're doing that right now. I think they've found who they are as an identity, and I think they can move forward and feel really good about themselves, at least having a very structured game plan going into every single game. And then for Washington, they just didn't do anything on offense. They finished with under 200 yards total. They had an INT, went 2.2 yards per carry. Dominating performance from this Penn State defense, and one that they played plenty well last week, but definitely had a couple of INTs, a couple of missed opportunities, the fumble into the end zone that made it look a little bit better than it was, at least on the scoreboard. So this was a great kind of bounce back performance from that defense, and I think it puts them right back on the CFP march. You got at Purdue, at Minnesota, Maryland to finish. You should be able to win all those games, go 11-1, possibly host a CFP game, and then the work really starts. You got to get that win, and then if you don't, then people have these same questions about James Franklin they've had pretty much every offseason around State College. But huge win here, and they keep going on their merry way to a possible CFP berth. Then we got Tennessee, and Tennessee did the exact same thing. It feels like they've kind of found themselves just a little bit. The downfield passing game was not necessarily perfect. They only hit a couple of deep balls, but that's all they need. Really, when you have that run game, when you have that defense, and you can hit a couple of 1, 2, maybe even 3 deep balls a game, you're going to be a really good team. You're going to be a team that's going to be a problem to deal with, and you're going to be a team that can possibly win a national title. That's just the reality. And it wasn't a perfect day because Nico did go down late in this one. It seems like he's going to be more than fine for that Georgia game, which is music to a lot of Tennessee fans' ears. But when 8 for 13, 174 yards and 2 scores, as you can see, 8 passes for 184 yards is quite the completion percentage rate. But at the end of the day, a lot of things going right for this team. The defense continues to be one of the best in the country. Now, Devon Booth did get going a little bit for Mississippi State in this game, got over 100 yards rushing, so something to watch there. Maybe that run defense is not quite as stout as it needs to be down the stretch of the season, but as of right now, they're doing exactly what they've always been doing. Got 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and are really sitting pretty. They're right now, they head to UGA, and let's say they beat them this weekend. They're on their way. Yeah, they have UTEP and Vandy to finish. They should be in Atlanta, possibly playing the only other one-loss team in that conference in Texas, with a chance to go to the CFP. Regardless, you're in the CFP if you go there. If you lose to Georgia and you're finding yourself at the end of the season at 10-2, I think that win over Alabama is huge, and especially Alabama beating LSU this past weekend, I think that's the game changer. But there's a world where if you beat Georgia this weekend, you could just be playing the winner of the A&M Texas game at the end of the year for the SEC title. So it would be wild, no doubt about that. But right now, with the way Georgia played last weekend and what we know about this Tennessee team, they very well could do it and then be on their way to a possible CFP berth, possible SEC title, and who knows when it stops for Tennessee. Then we'll drop down just a little bit here and get to Clemson, Virginia Tech, because Clemson did right the ship in a relatively ugly but nice win over Virginia Tech on the road, and I think it was largely the defense that you have to credit for this. Virginia Tech only had 40 yards rushing in this game for a team that, if they're going to win football games, they got to run the football, no doubt about that. And then you have Clemson, got 2 picks, a fumble recovery in this one. They were all over the place, and in the game where the offense just was a little bit weird, a little bit up and down. You know, the box score shows you a really incredible performance with a lot of different guys getting a ton of yards. It was not all that pretty, I'll be totally honest with you. But Clemson being able to count on 100 plus from Phil Mafah on a weekly basis is about as huge of a luxury as they could possibly have. With this offense sputtering, with this offense, especially pass offense, not doing what it usually has done, at least early in the season it had done, the run game being able to pick up the slack has been huge, and Clemson, because of that loss to Miami, is still in the ACC race. I think if they win out and Miami does as well, they're probably on the outside looking in with the tiebreakers, but at the end of the day, you win the pit this upcoming weekend, that's your last ACC game. Then you have 2 out-of-conference games to finish, that big one against South Carolina, so a lot of things that could go right for Clemson over the last little bit, but as of right now, I still think of them as probably the 3rd best team in that conference and probably a team that's going to be on the outside looking in, but you never really know. Obviously, with the way Miami is right now, maybe they lose this a couple of weeks against Wake Forest or Syracuse, and this thing totally opens up for Clemson. And then we have the weirdest finish of the entire weekend by a country mile. With 4 minutes left in this game, it was 16-9. Missouri was winning. With 2 minutes left in this game, it was 23-16, with OU leading after a fumble recovery from OU on a very weird fumble from Missouri. Then Missouri had a 57-yard touchdown drive and then a fumble recovery, scoop and score to win the game in the weirdest fumble I have ever seen. It was literally like Jackson Dart stripped himself. I've never seen it. I have seen it. I haven't seen it in that way. I haven't seen it when the guy's not even getting ready to pass and he's just patting the ball and he essentially just tosses it backwards. Was very weird, but it was a microcosm of this OU season. They have flashes, they have ability, they feel like they have the talent to win these games, and then the ineptitude on offense and a couple of misses on defense totally does them in. So that's who they are at this point, and they're going to have to figure out where they stand at the end of the season because the mission the rest of the way is get to a bowl game, and you have Bama and LSU the rest of the way, so not a guarantee. They lose those next 2 weekends. That talk about, Brent Venables getting 2025 as a prove-it season might just go out the window in a hurry. I know that sounds crazy, but this is Oklahoma. This is a team that feels like they should be in a much better place right now, and I don't think he'll get fired regardless, but I don't know. It could get sketchy. Let's just leave it at that for the time being. For Missouri, Drinkwitz really wanted to remind us that they are still in the playoff hunt. They are not in the playoff hunt. I'll be totally honest with you, especially with all of the 10-2 teams that could come up in the SEC. There is not one of them that I would pick below Missouri. Just plain and simple. Even Texas, the team that I said if they're 10-2, they're probably on the chopping block. They would be miles ahead of Missouri in my mind. So Missouri's not getting into the CFP. They could win out and not get into the CFP. They do have South Carolina this upcoming weekend. They're 2-touchdown underdogs, and they should be. So they're not going to the CFP regardless of what happens the rest of the way. I'm just going to put that to rest right about now. But the last one I want to talk about here is Army. A huge, huge win, and one where did not go at all the way that I thought it was going to go. Army wins this game 14-3, and frankly, if you told me it was 14-3, I would have thought we were about 3 drives into this game. I would have thought Army went down and scored. North Texas answered with a field goal. Army went right back down and scored. So really remarkable stuff from both defenses, especially Army, but both defenses really played their butts off. Army ran the ball 64 times for 293 yards, 2 scores. To be honest, that's pretty good. If you're playing Army and they're going to run the ball 64 times with all of the different variations, holding them under 300 is a win. I'll be totally honest. But they did have a drive in this game that was just absolute. It was beautiful in every possible way. But the second touchdown drive, 21 plays, 94 yards, almost 14 minutes, and that is Army football. It was absolutely incredible to watch. I don't think they had a run of over 8 yards on that drive. It was awesome. It was so much fun, and it was one of those things that if you're a football guy, go ahead and watch that compilation because it's really special to watch. But the Army defense was remarkable as well. Oh, excuse me. After the field goal from North Texas on their first drive, they were able to stop a drive on the 2-yard line. They were able to force a turnover on downs. They had 2 picks in the end zone. Really remarkable stuff. A lot of bend don't break from this team against the offense that can really make a lot of teams break. And then a huge win. That sets them up for a huge couple of weeks when they go over to when they play Notre Dame in a couple of weeks. And then they got UTSA left on the schedule before a possible American title. They can lock it up, I believe, this weekend if Navy were to lose or if Tulane were to lose. A lot of different things that are happening around that. But it feels like Army's pretty much guaranteed a spot in that American title. I'd be very surprised if it all went wrong at this point, but a win over Notre Dame would probably almost definitely send you to the CFP. So a lot still on the table for this team. It still feels like a team that Notre Dame might be a little bit too much, but who knows? We'll get to 2 weeks and we'll make that pick and we'll see what happens. But a huge win. One of those wins where you just got to get out with more points than the other team. They were able to do that. As ugly as it was, they were able to get it done. And Bryson Daly hopefully will be a little bit more healthy for that Notre Dame game, and then they can really start rolling downhill. But a lot of remarkable performances. I think the biggest one for me was what Texas did. Although Florida's not that world-beating team, they're a relatively solid defense. I'm not going to give them a ton of praise, but a relatively solid defense that was made to look like they were just downright terrible. So I think Texas might be on their way. I think they might have found a groove here, and it might be really hard to stop them the rest of the way, but obviously something we will talk about the rest of the season. And let's take our final break here. And when we come back, we just got to do a little bit of a wrap-up with all the other games we hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the show. We'll break them down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big time performances from the top 25 teams. Texas seems to be rolling downhill once again. We had a big time win from Army to stay undefeated over North Texas as they get ready for that huge one against Notre Dame in a couple of weeks. But let's get into a little bit of a wrap up here with all the other games we hadn't had a chance to get to, and still some top 25 games that I want to get to real quickly. And we'll start with that number one team in the country that continues to assert themselves as the top team in the country. They're playing really, really good football. Did not leave this one remotely up for debate throughout this one. Was really, really impressive and is as efficient as really anyone in the country. And that's really the biggest thing for me at this very moment. With so many different teams being up and down, so many different teams playing very weird football one day and then lights out the other. Oregon's just playing lights out football. Week in and week out, they're playing really, really great stuff, and obviously bigger challenges ahead, but this was a big-time win. And then Dylan Gabriel threw for 3 scores, got over the FBS record, so congratulations to him. Took him a little bit of time, but that's beside the point. We can get into that argument a little bit later, but they did get 180 yards on the ground, had a crazy fake punt when they were up 13, just kind of what Dan Lanning does, a little bit of Dan Campbell and Dan Lanning. But at the end of the day, they handled their business at a very, very high rate, get on with a win that they very well should have won kind of at this margin. So really impressive stuff. The defense also did work, not allowing 300 yards, only 83 yards on the ground in this one, forced 3 turnovers. Maryland was 6 for 19 on third down. Really, really good stuff. And all of the places that you need to be good, Michigan was in this one. They got at Wisconsin and Washington coming up. They win those 2. They're undefeated. They're the number 1 team in the country. They're heading to the Big Ten title, possibly against this team right here. Ohio State was able to handle their business against Purdue, 45-0, blanked Purdue, and it's Purdue. I'm not necessarily going to put too much stock into this game, but it was nice to see Ohio State continue on their way, get another comfortable win here. And Will Howard, 21 for 26, 260 through the air, 3 scores, 8 different players caught passes. You had 173 on the ground. This team is just incredible, and they were incredible defensively as well, allowing just over 200 yards, forcing 2 turnovers. It feels like everything's coming into place. It feels like all that stuff that we talked about, how this defense, this offense, everything is so well put together. The talent level is just ridiculous. They just need to get it all working in unison. Feels like it's starting to work in unison. Now, obviously, big-time test coming up. Now, they do have at Northwestern before the huge one against Indiana and then Michigan at home, so plenty of work to do, and obviously that Indiana game is massive, but as of right now, feels like everything's starting to roll downhill for Ohio State and could just very well be the team that ends up winning the title at the end of the day. And then we had a dominating win over Florida State because that's just what happens. Pretty much a reminder every single week to say Florida State gets beaten by a lot of points. You'll pretty much have the gist of that game. But this one was ugly, and it led to a couple of staff changes that probably were a little bit overdue, but they get done officially at Florida State. Adam Fuller has been fired as the defensive coordinator. Alex Atkins has been fired as the offensive coordinator, and the wide receiver coach, Ron Duggins, is out at Florida State. So the weirdness begins. You got to figure out how you're going to go about this. They have plenty of guys that they can go after. I'm just going to put this out there. Brennan Marion as their offensive coordinator would be a special thing to watch. But that's a totally different conversation. We will get into that in time. But overall, this is when it starts. This is when Mike Norvell's job is really on the line, where he's got to rebuild this thing. He's got to get a portal class that's going to win them games. He's got to start recruiting better at the high school level. It all starts with those staff hires that he's about to make. So a couple of really interesting months around Tallahassee coming up. But this game in and of itself, let's just focus back in on the present here. But Notre Dame's offense continues to roll over 200 yards through the air and on the ground. No turnovers. Their defense is their defense. They got 2 INTs, including a pick 6 that just totally buried this game and made it look really, really ugly. But Notre Dame continues to handle their business. Now they head into a stretch where it's a little sketchy. It's not necessarily games that they should lose by any respect, but Virginia, a team that's coming off a big win over Pitt, that's very dangerous. You have Army, obviously, playing really good football and can always spring an upset. And then you got at USC. Not necessarily a team that's played all that great of football, but rivalry game. They've just changed quarterbacks. Maybe that the spark this offense needs, and you could be in a little bit of trouble. Obviously, all of this is conjecture, but right now, Notre Dame's doing what they need to do. They're still right on thin ice, but that thin ice feels pretty good right about now if you're Notre Dame. Then we have Boise State play one of the worst games they played all year, probably. This was not a very, very clean performance really at all, and it was Ashton Genty that, imagine that, won the game for them. 34 carries, 209 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. He was the whole offense for Boise State, as he has been in a number of different ways, because they only passed for 119 yards. They had a pick in this game. It was very ugly, and Nevada's may have just given the blueprint to a couple more talented teams to possibly be able to stop this offense. Just let Genty do his thing, I guess, is probably the best way to go about it. Just say he's going to get his, he's going to do him, we're going to do our best to stop him, but at the end of the day, he's probably going to get 150 yards, a couple of scores. We have to be able to counter on offense and then be able to fully stop this pass game is really the key to winning against Boise State. So they're still on their way to a Mountain West championship, a CFP berth. They have at San Jose State, Wyoming, and Oregon State to finish, so they should be okay. They should be firmly on their way, but at the end of the day, this is still a team that's a little bit flawed and still a team that, if they got into the CFP, I wouldn't necessarily love in any of the games that they would play. But obviously, that's a conversation we can have down the road, and definitely one that could change in a hurry with someone like Ashton Genty on the field. But moving forward to Washington State getting able to get a very, very dominant win over Utah State this weekend, and the slimmest of paths to the CFP is still alive. I truly do mean a million things would have to happen for Washington State to get in, even at 11-1. But at the end of the day, they get one step closer to 11-1 and possibly could just be setting themselves for huge success once they get into a real conference in a couple of years. But he went 18 for 24, 179 yards, 4 scores passing, then had 13 carries, 55 yards, and a score on the ground. The dude is just absolutely remarkable, has been one of the best players in the country this year, and Washington State overall totaled 300 yards on the ground and did not trail in this game. So it was the dominating performance that they very much needed. And they have some tough games coming up at New Mexico this upcoming weekend, which is a dangerous team just to score with. You have at Oregon State in a couple of weeks and then Wyoming. So a lot of things still on the table for this team and a lot of things that would have to happen for them to reach the ultimate goal, which is the CFP for them. Then we had this game. South Carolina was able to beat Vanderbilt in a dominating defensive performance, and feels like that's kind of been a pattern for Vanderbilt as of late. I'm not saying their offense has been figured out, quote unquote, but the run game has really struggled over the last couple of weeks. They had 28 carries for 108 yards in this game, and Diego Pavia was their leading rusher with 65. And the interior run game, that north-south run game that we talked about last week, was just not there. For the third weekend in a row where you had Texas, you had Auburn, now you had South Carolina, it was just a little bit too much for him. Now, the Lenora Sellers show was alive and well on Saturday. He topped 350 total yards, had 4 scores in this one. The dude's remarkable. He feels like he's finding his groove, he's grown throughout this year. He was a very young quarterback to start it. He's now a little bit more veteran, and it's really showing off. So South Carolina's a great team, and I think that LSU loss doesn't change too much for them, to be totally honest with you, but overall, I think they're just too much of a mess in front of them. I think they are a team that, frankly, one call goes differently in that LSU game, they are firmly in the CFP conversation. Frankly, they'd probably be in the CFP right about now, but they lost that game. And I hate to say it, but that's probably enough to keep them out of this race. There could be a world where they could beat a couple of the teams that make their way into the playoff this year, but as of right now, you can't necessarily say that with your chest, so they're probably on the outside looking in. I hate to say it, but even if they win out, I don't necessarily love this team to get into the CFP, and I wish they could. I just don't think it's possible. But maybe I'm proven wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong, frankly. But moving over to the Big 12, Arizona State's just still alive. They're still hanging out in the Big 12, and they've got 2 straight. They've won 2 straight, and this one they did it without Cam Scadaboo, which is huge. And they get Kansas State and BYU in the final 3 games of the season. They could blow up the Big 12. Say Colorado loses one more game. Say Kansas State beats Iowa State at the end of the year. This could be the team that goes to Arlington. I know that sounds crazy, but with the way the Big 12 has been shaking out, crazy stuff's going to happen. And being able to do it without Cam Scadaboo is absolutely incredible. But Sam Leavitt was great in this one. 16 for 25, 161 yards through the air, and 3 scores. Really, really remarkable stuff when they very, very badly needed it. So really incredible stuff from this Arizona State team. They are very, very tough. Cannot give enough props to what Kenny Dillingham has done over there in Tempe. But you got a really, really tough stretch coming up. It could be a season where you totally blow everything up, end 10-2, go to Arlington, and miraculously find your way into the CFP. It could also be a world where you lose 2 out of the next 3 games. You walk out of here with a little bit of a disappointing 8-4 season, and you're trying to regroup for 2025. So a lot still on the table for Arizona State. If they can win those next 2 games against BYU and against Kansas State, then watch out. This might just be the team that you see in Arlington. But obviously a lot of things need to happen to get there. But UCF, a very disappointing win. They could salvage it with 2 wins over West Virginia and Utah to finish, but this was a missed opportunity, no doubt about that. And it'll be really interesting to watch what happens the rest of the way for not only UCF, but if Arizona State can just mess up the Big 12 just a little bit, I'm more than happy to sit here and watch it happen. But finally, we'll go down to the Group of 5 for a huge Group of 5 performance from Navy this past weekend, and this was the result they badly needed. They ran for over 300 yards, forced 3 turnovers on Bryce Archie, and got a very comfortable win. That was the ultimate goal here, and now they're in a place where they got a huge game against Tulane this upcoming weekend. They win, they're probably in the American title. If Tulane wins, Tulane's probably in the American title, and whoever it is, they're probably playing Army up there. So it'll be really awesome to watch. And we still have the chance for those back-to-back Army-Navy games. It'll be interesting to see how all of that unfolds, especially if Army's undefeated. But at the end of the day, regardless of if Army loses to Notre Dame or not, you're still in a place where we're going to have a very, very fun American championship. And the more I see Boise State play, the more I think, even with a loss, maybe those teams should get in. But we'll get into that conversation a little bit down the road. But huge win from Navy, keeps them right in the mix for the American, and a couple of more wins away. If you beat Tulane, then you're in a great place to possibly win your conference. And who knows, with all the craziness going on with Boise State starting to show a little bit of a chinks in the armor, might as well open up a door for Navy to possibly get back in this thing. It sounds crazy, but who knows? At the end of the day, everything has been all over the place this year, so I'm not counting anything out right about now. But overall, remarkable weekend. It was one of those weekends where you're glued to your TV, you're enjoying every single moment, and you just cannot fathom how many different incredible moments there were throughout the day. There were a couple of upsets early with Miami going down, with Indiana fighting off Michigan. You had, the incredible performance from Ole Miss, incredible performance from Alabama. We had Colorado really kind of assert themselves as the favorite in the Big 12 going forward. It's insane. This season has been absolutely insane, and it pains me to believe that we're coming towards an end, but tomorrow we will get into all the craziness. We'll try to break it down for you, try to give you an idea of how the tiebreakers could work out the rest of the way. I can't promise it's foolproof, but I'm going to do my very best. But incredible, incredible weekend. We'll continue talking about it tomorrow. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram. Still feels weird saying X, but Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, all of those social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So NBA's back up and running. We got you covered there. We also have baseball. We have NFL football. Everything. Don't worry about that. Anything in the world of sports, GSMC has you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.